The warehouse smelled like motor oil, rusted iron, and fear. A man knelt in the center of the concrete floor, crying. Not loudly, just enough to remind everyone in the room that he was still human. His wrists were zip-tied behind his back. Blood ran from a cut above his left eyebrow, tracing a crooked line down his cheek and dripping off his jaw in a slow, steady rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. Like a clock nobody wanted to hear. "Please," the man said. "I have a family. I got 2 kids. Please." Kang So-jin did not look at him. He adjusted his cufflinks instead. Sterling silver, engraved with the character for silence. A gift from his dead father, who had taught him at 14 years old that mercy in their world was the same as a loaded gun pointed at your own head. You could hold it if you wanted, but eventually, it would go off. Around him, 6 men stood in disciplined silence. Black suits, hands folded, eyes forward, waiting. They had done this before. They would do it again. One nod from Kang, and the man on the floor would become a problem that no longer existed. The kneeling man tried again. His voice cracked on every other word. "I swear, I didn't tell them anything. I swear on my kids, I didn't—" Enough. Kang's voice was not loud. It never was. He had learned from his father that volume was for men who had already lost control. Power spoke softly because it didn't need permission to be heard. He lifted the gun from the table beside him, matte black, cold steel. The weight of it was familiar, not comforting, just known, the way a surgeon knows the weight of a scalpel. He chambered around. The man on the floor squeezed his eyes shut, and then, "Please don't." The voice was small, too small. It did not belong in a warehouse where the walls were streaked with grease stains and the floor had been hosed clean more times than anyone cared to count. Nobody moved, because nobody believed what they heard. Kang turned slowly. At the entrance stood a little girl, 5 years old, maybe 6. Hair in 2 puff ponytails that had come loose on one side. Shoes that were 2 sizes too big, stuffed with what looked like newspaper at the toes. A thin purple coat, wrong for January in Chicago, with rain still clinging to the sleeves. She clutched a stuffed bunny by one ear. The bunny had been washed so many times its fur was flat and gray, and one of its button eyes dangled by a single thread. She walked forward, past the armed guards who could have stopped her with one hand, past the blood on the concrete, past the kind of power that had made grown men cross the street rather than share a sidewalk with Kang So-jin. Nobody stopped her, because Kang hadn't said to. And in that silence, in the 3 seconds it took for a 5-year-old girl with newspaper in her shoes to walk across a killing floor, something in the room shifted. The air changed weight. The armed men in their black suits felt it but couldn't name it. Later, one of them would describe it to his wife as the feeling you get in church when the singing stops and the silence that follows feels holy. The girl stopped directly in front of Kang So-jin, close enough to see the gun in his hand, close enough to see the man on his knees shaking behind her, close enough to see the scar that ran from Kang's left ear to his jawline, a thin silver line that he'd gotten at 19 from a man who was no longer alive. She reached out and tugged gently at the hem of his suit jacket. Kang looked down. Nobody had touched him without permission in years. His own men flinched when he entered a room. Women kept their distance, or kept it professional. The last person who had grabbed his clothing had been his mother, 26 years ago, pulling him close in a hospital bed that smelled like antiseptic and lilies, whispering something in Korean he still heard in dreams, but could never quite make out the words. "Are you the bad man?" the girl asked. If you're watching from anywhere around the world, drop your location in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story reaches. Hit that subscribe button, follow the channel, and stay with me to the very end. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Silence. Rain hammered against the high warehouse windows in sheets. Guards frozen. The man on the floor forgot to breathe. The girl's brown eyes held Kang's face with a steadiness that had no business being in the eyes of a child. They were old eyes. Eyes that had learned to measure danger the way other children measure distance on a playground. Quickly, accurately, without flinching. My mommy says you weren't always bad, she continued softly. She says you used to protect people. The gun in Kang's hand lowered an inch. Just an inch. His voice came out quieter than he expected. Quieter than his men had ever heard it. Quieter than the rain. Your mother talks too much. The girl shook her head. Slow. Certain. No, she talks about you when she cries. Something shifted in the room. Not the air this time, something heavier. The room itself seemed to contract, walls closer, ceiling lower, as though the building had taken a breath and held it. Every man in the warehouse felt it. None of them understood it. Why does she cry? Kang asked before he could stop himself. The question escaped like a prisoner through a cracked wall, fast, desperate, gone before the guards could react. The girl hesitated. Her small fingers tightened around the hem of his jacket. Her chin trembled once. Just once. Then she locked it down tight, the way a child learns to lock things down when crying gets you nothing but more trouble. And she whispered, "Because you promised you'd come back." The gun slipped from his hand. It didn't crash. It didn't echo. It didn't clatter across the concrete the way guns do in movies, loud and dramatic and clean. It just fell. A dull, heavy thud. The sound of something final being set down. And in that split second, the most feared man in the city of Chicago stopped being the most powerful man in the room. A 5-year-old girl with a stuffed bunny and newspaper shoes had taken that from him without raising her voice. "Who is your mother?" he asked. His throat was tight. His hands that had held weapons and signed death orders and never once trembled, were shaking. The girl swallowed hard. "Her name is Zara Hollis." Nobody in the warehouse recognized the name, but Kang So-jin did, because that name belonged to the only woman who had ever walked away from him while he still had reasons to make her stay. A woman he had ordered protected 7 years ago when she was 22 and working double shifts at a clinic on the south side, and didn't know that the man who stopped to help her carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs ran an empire built on silence and blood. A woman whose husband he had saved on a street corner. A woman whose husband had died in a parking garage 2 years later. A woman he had been told 4 years ago was gone, relocated, untraceable, safe, not dead. He hadn't ordered that. He would never have ordered that, but gone in a way that meant the same thing. For the first time in 20 years, Kang So-jin felt afraid. Not of rivals, not of betrayal, not of the police or the FBI or the other families who circled his territory like wolves around a wounded elk. He was afraid of what he had done, and of what might still be waiting for him outside that warehouse door, standing in the rain, with her arms wrapped around herself, shaking. Not from the cold, from something much worse. From the memory of a promise a younger, less broken man had made. A promise he hadn't kept. The girl tugged his jacket again. "Will you come see her?" she asked. "She's outside. She's scared, but she came anyway." Kang looked at the man still kneeling on the concrete. The man whose life had been measured in seconds 60 heartbeats ago. The man who was staring at the little girl like she was something holy. "Get him out of here," Kang said to his men. His voice sounded different, even to him. Like something rusted was trying to move again after years of stillness. "Nobody touches him. We're done." His lieutenant, Yoon Tae-hyuk, thick neck, flat eyes, the kind of man who smiled only when something terrible was about to happen, stepped forward. "Boss, the traitor." "I said we're done." Yoon's mouth closed, his jaw tightened. Something dark and fast moved behind his eyes. Not obedience, but calculation. Kang saw it, filed it. But tonight, he didn't have room for Yoon's ambitions. Tonight, he had a door to walk through, and on the other side of it, a woman he hadn't seen in 7 years was standing in the rain, holding on to the last thread of a promise he'd made when he was still the kind of man who made promises. Kang stepped over the gun on the floor. He didn't pick it up, and he walked toward the door. The rain in Chicago in January doesn't fall. It attacks. It comes sideways off the lake, cold enough to feel like needles, hard enough to turn an alley into a river in minutes. The kind of rain that makes you understand why people leave this city, and why the ones who stay are either stubborn, broke, or running from something worse than weather. Zara Hollis was all three. She stood against the far wall of the alley behind the warehouse, arms wrapped tight around her body, chin tucked into the collar of a coat that was too thin for this. Her hair, thick, dark twists pulled back and pinned, was soaked through. Water ran down her forehead, her cheeks, her neck. She didn't wipe it away. She had stopped noticing rain 3 days ago, when the noticing part of her brain had been replaced by a single, screaming instruction: keep Nyla alive. The warehouse door opened. Light spilled into the alley. Yellow, harsh, it caught the rain and made it look like falling glass. And then he was there. Kang So-jin, standing in the doorway. Taller than she remembered. Older. The silver at his temples hadn't been there 7 years ago. The scar on his jaw had faded from pink to white. But his eyes were the same. Dark, steady, careful. Eyes that gave nothing away and took in everything. He looked at her the way you look at a ghost. Zara. Her name in his mouth sounded different than she remembered. Rougher. Like it had been stored somewhere deep and brought out without polishing. She didn't move from the wall. "Don't say my name like that," she said. "Like you've been thinking about it." "I have been thinking about it." "For how long?" He didn't answer, which was its own answer. Behind him, Nyla appeared in the doorway. The girl walked straight to her mother and pressed herself against Zara's side. Zara's hand found her daughter's head automatically, fingers spreading across the puff ponytails, pulling her close. "She's shaking, Mama." "I know, baby." "Can we go inside?" She asked me to come back inside. Zara looked at Kang, looking for the trap, looking for the angle. 4 years alone had taught her that every open door was just a different kind of cage if you didn't check the lock first. "Inside," she said. "And then what?" "And then we talk." "About what? About how your people have been following me for 3 days? About how your man with the thick neck showed up at my job Tuesday night and watched me from the parking lot like I was something to be cleaned up?" Kang's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted, a micro movement around his eyes. Not guilt. Zara wasn't sure he was capable of guilt, but recognition. The look of a man who has just learned that a fire he thought was contained has already jumped the road. Yoon came to your job? Yoon. Is that his name? Big man. Flat face. Smiled at me like I was already dead. Zara's voice cracked on the last word. She caught it. Sealed it. Her jaw tightened the same way Nyla's did, and Kong realized he was looking at the source. The place where a 5-year-old girl had learned to swallow her fear and stand straight. He wasn't supposed to be there, Kong said. Well, he was. And the next night, 2 men came to my apartment building. Sat in a black car outside for 6 hours. My neighbor told me I wasn't there because I'd already grabbed Nyla and run.
Where did you go?
Where do you think? I've been in shelters, in a church basement, in a Greyhound station at 3 a.m. with my daughter asleep across my lap, and a stuffed bunny falling on the floor every time the bus pulled in. Her voice thickened but held. 3 days, no sleep, no money. No one to call. Because the one lesson this city taught me is that black women in trouble are invisible until they're dead. And then they're a headline for 12 hours. Kong took a step forward. Zara's whole body went rigid. He stopped.
You could have gone anywhere.
He said.
But you came here.
Because my husband told me something once. 6 years ago. He said a man in an expensive suit saved him on a street corner. Korean. Scar on his jaw. Didn't say a word, just stood there, and the danger scattered. She paused. Darnell talked about you like you were proof. Proof that not everyone in this city was rotten. Proof that somebody out there still did the right thing for no reason. The name landed like a punch that Kang didn't see coming. Darnell. A street corner on Halstead. October. Late. He'd been leaving a meeting, saw a man outnumbered, 3 against 1, stopped the car because the math was wrong. Stood on the sidewalk in a $10,000 suit and watched 3 men with knives decide that the odds had changed. Drove away without speaking. He'd never known the man's name. And then Darnell died, Zara continued. Her voice was flat now, controlled, the kind of controlled that takes years of practice. Shot in a parking garage, police said robbery. Case closed in 4 months. Nobody cared. Nobody investigated. Nobody even asked me if Darnell had enemies. She swallowed. He didn't. He coached Little League. He worked 2 jobs. He sang off-key in the shower and burned pancakes every Sunday and called his mother 3 times a week. Nyla pressed closer to Zara's hip. The girl's eyes were open, staring at the ground. She'd heard this before. Maybe many times. Children who grow up around grief learn its rhythms the way other children learn songs. I didn't come here because I trust you, Zara said. I came here because I'm out of doors. I came here because a dead man told me you were decent. And I came here because my daughter hasn't slept in a bed in 3 nights, and I will walk into the devil's house if it means she sleeps warm tonight. The rain kept falling. Kong stood in the doorway, and he understood. With the clarity that comes only when you've been knocked loose from the story you tell yourself about who you are. That this woman was not asking him for help. She was testing him, holding up her dead husband's memory like a mirror, and asking, "Are you still the man he thought you were?" "Come inside," Kang said. "Both of you. Nobody's touching you tonight. Nobody's touching you tomorrow. You have my word." Zara stared at him for a long moment. Rain ran into her eyes, and she let it. "Your word," she repeated. "I've seen what words are worth in this city. Then watch what I do." She looked down at Nyla. The girl looked up at her. Something passed between them. The kind of conversation mothers and daughters have without words, when they've been alone so long that silence has become its own language. Zara took her daughter's hand, and she walked through the door. The restaurant was called Hanul. It sat on the corner of Michigan Avenue and a side street that didn't have a name anymore, just a number the city had assigned after the original street sign kept disappearing. Hanul meant sky in Korean, though the building itself was earthbound and heavy. Dark wood, tinted windows, a black awning that gave nothing away. It was the kind of restaurant where a steak cost $200, and the real business happened in the rooms you couldn't see from the dining floor. At 2 in the morning, the kitchen was closed, the dining room was dark. The staff had gone home hours ago, except for Bae, the 73-year-old head chef, who lived in a small apartment above the walk-in freezer and claimed he hadn't taken a day off since 2011. Bae was the only person in Kang So-jin's organization who could speak to him without being spoken to first. He had earned this right by being there before anyone else, and by making kimchi jjigae that tasted exactly like Kang's dead mother used to make. Bae took one look at Zara and Nyla standing in the back kitchen, dripping rainwater onto the tile floor, and said nothing. He turned on the stove. Heated broth, warmed rice. Set out a bowl of sliced pear on a clean plate. Put the kettle on for tea. Then he looked at Kang and in Korean, said, "The child needs dry socks." Kang nodded. He sent one of his men for supplies, dry clothes, blankets, socks, a toothbrush, and stood in the kitchen doorway while Zara sat at the steel prep table with Nyla on her lap. The girl was eating pear slices one at a time, holding each one up to inspect it before biting, the way children do when food has been uncertain enough that they've learned to pay attention to it. "She hasn't eaten since yesterday," Zara said. Not to Kang, not to anyone, just out loud, the way you say things when you're too tired to aim them at a person. Bae set a bowl of rice and broth in front of them. Then he placed a second bowl at the far end of the table. He looked at Zara and pointed to it. "For you," he said in careful English. "You eat too." Zara looked at the old man. Something in her face crumbled for half a second, a flash of raw gratitude that she clearly didn't want anyone to see. And then she rebuilt it, brick by brick, right there at the table. "Thank you," she said. Bae nodded and went back to the stove, where he began washing dishes that were already clean. Kang understood. The old man was staying close. Not because he'd been asked to, because a woman and a child were eating in his kitchen. And in Bae's Korea, in the Korea he still carried inside him 60 years after leaving, a cook did not leave while people were still hungry. Kang sat at the far end of the table. He didn't eat. He watched Nyla pick through the rice with careful fingers, separating the grains she liked from the ones she didn't, building a small wall of rejected rice along the rim of her bowl. It was such a normal, ordinary, childlike thing to do that it made his chest hurt. "She does that every time," Zara said quietly. She was watching him watch Nyla. "Separates the sticky rice from the fluffy. Been doing it since she could feed herself." "My mother did that," Kang said. He hadn't meant to say it. The words just appeared, summoned by the sight of small fingers sorting rice. "She said the sticky ones had more soul." Zara said nothing, but she didn't look away. Nyla yawned. A big, jaw-cracking yawn that made her whole body shudder. She leaned back against Zara's chest, eyes heavy, the stuffed bunny, Mr., tucked under her chin. "Mama," she whispered. "Yeah, baby. Is the bad man going to help us?" Zara's hand tightened on her daughter's arm. She looked at Kang across the table. He felt the weight of her gaze like a hand pressed against his chest. Not pushing, not pulling, just resting there. Measuring. Deciding. "He's thinking about it," Zara said. "He should think faster," Nyla said. Her eyes closed. "We're tired." And then she was asleep. Just like that. The way children fall asleep when exhaustion finally outweighs fear. Completely, instantly, like a candle going out. Kong watched the girl's breathing slow. Her fingers loosened around Mister's ear. Her face went soft in sleep, all the watchfulness draining away, leaving behind just a child. Just a small, ordinary, 5-year-old girl who should have been sleeping in her own bed, in a room with a nightlight and posters on the wall. Not passed out in the back kitchen of a Mafia front at 2 in the morning. Zara was staring at him. She walked into that warehouse by herself, Zara said. I told her to wait in the alley. I told her not to move. But she heard the man crying inside and she just went. Zara's voice dropped. 5 years old. She heard someone in pain and she walked past guns to get to them. What kind of child does that? The kind who learned it from her mother. Zara flinched. Not at the compliment, at being seen, at being read so easily by a man she was trying very hard to keep at a distance. Don't do that, she said. Do what? See me. I didn't come here to be seen. I came here to survive the week. Kong leaned back in his chair. The kitchen was quiet except for Bay's dishwater sounds and the hum of the industrial refrigerator. Through the small window above the prep station, the Chicago sky was the color of a bruise, black and purple and orange where the city lights hit the clouds. I'm going to ask you something, he said, and I need you to answer honestly. Zara's jaw tightened. I've been honest since I walked in. Tuesday night, the loading bay at Lakeshore Gardens. How much did you see? 3 men, black cases, refrigerated truck. One had a dragon tattoo on his right hand. One made a phone call in Korean. The third one, your man Yoon, looked right at me and smiled. She paused. That smile is the reason I'm here instead of home. Kang processed this. His face showed nothing, but beneath the surface, calculations were running. Fast, cold, automatic. Yoon had been at the loading bay. Yoon had made contact with the witness. Yoon had then gone to her workplace the following night. Yoon had then sent men to her apartment building. All without telling him. Which meant Yoon wasn't just handling a problem. He was building a case for handling it his own way. And once it was done, he would have presented it to Kang as a fait accompli. Problem solved, hands clean, no need for details. The thought should have made Kang angry. Instead, it made him cold. The particular cold of a man who realizes that the machine he built has started running without his hand on the wheel. 72 hours, he said. That's the window Yoon set for dealing with you. We're already 12 hours in. Dealing with me, Zara repeated. You mean killing me. I mean silence. Permanent silence. That's how my lieutenant sees it. And how do you see it? Kong looked at the sleeping child on her lap, at the stuffed bunny with a dangling eye, at the newspaper crumpled inside shoes that were 2 sizes too big. I see a woman who watched her husband get buried and raised a child alone and worked night shifts keeping other people's parents alive. And I see my man Yoon making decisions without my authority that put that woman in a position where she had to run through a city in January with a 5-year-old and a stuffed rabbit. That's not an answer. You're right, it's not. He leaned forward. Here's the answer. Nobody is touching you, not in 72 hours. Not in 72 days. I'm going to find out what Yoon is doing without my knowledge, and I'm going to find out what really happened to your husband in that parking garage. And until I have answers, you stay here, both of you. Zara studied his face. Reading him the way she'd learned to read people, not their words, but the spaces between their words. The pauses, the micro-movements. The things the body says when the mouth is still constructing its lie. She found no lie. which scared her more than if she had. "My husband used to say you were proof," she said quietly. "Proof that someone in this city still did the right thing for no reason." Kang stood up, his chair scraped against the tile. "Your husband was wrong about me," he said. "I've never done anything for no reason." He walked to the doorway, stopped. Didn't turn around. "But I'm going to try." He left the kitchen. Zara sat alone with her sleeping daughter in a restaurant that smelled like broth and ginger and old wood. She could hear Kang's footsteps fading down the hallway. She could hear Bae softly humming a Korean melody she didn't recognize. She could hear the rain outside losing its anger, settling into something steady. She pulled Nyla closer. "We're okay," she whispered into her daughter's hair. "We're okay." She didn't believe it yet, but for the first time in 3 days, she wanted to. And wanting to believe was the first small, fragile step toward something she hadn't allowed herself in 4 years. Hope. Dangerous, stupid, world-ending hope. The kind that gets you killed or keeps you alive. Zara Hollis didn't know which one it would be yet, but her daughter had walked past guns for her tonight, and a man she barely knew had let the weapon fall. Maybe that was enough. For now. Morning came to the restaurant the way mornings come to places that keep secrets. Slowly, reluctantly, as if the light itself wasn't sure it wanted to see what had happened in the dark. Zara woke on a narrow bed in the room above the kitchen. Kang's room. She knew this because it smelled like him. Sandalwood, black tea, and something colder underneath. The scent of a man who lived with tension the way other people lived with furniture. Just there, part of the room. Nyla was still asleep beside her, curled around Mister like the bunny was a life raft. The girl's face was smooth in sleep. Peaceful. The watchfulness that lived behind her eyes during waking hours had finally retreated, leaving behind just a child. Just a 5-year-old girl who should have been worrying about cartoons and which cereal had the best prize inside, not whether armed men were waiting outside her door. Zara sat up. The room was small. A bed, a chair, a window that looked out over a side street, still wet from last night's rain. No mirror. She noticed that. A man who removed his own mirror was either very vain or very broken, and Kang So-jin didn't seem like the vain type. She checked the door. Unlocked. She opened it an inch and listened. Voices downstairs. Korean. The clatter of kitchen prep. Knives on cutting boards, water running, the bass note of a heavy pot being set on a burner. And underneath it, closer, the low murmur of 2 men speaking in the hallway below. She recognized one voice, Kang. Measured and level, each word placed like a stone in a wall. The other voice she didn't recognize, but she knew its texture. Hard, impatient. The voice of a man who considered conversation a waste of time between decisions. Yoon. She pressed her ear to the gap in the door. Shouldn't be here, Yoon was saying. She's a liability. Every hour she's in this building increases the risk. The risk is mine to measure. With respect, boss, it was mine to manage. You gave me 72 hours. I gave you 72 hours to confirm what she saw and who she told. Not to put a hit team outside her apartment while her daughter was inside. Silence. The kind that has edges. She saw the Cermak shipment, Yoon said, his voice lower now. Controlled. She saw faces. She can identify the crew. Every day she's breathing is a day she can walk into a federal building and hand them photographs. She's a night shift caregiver who makes $14 an hour. She's not calling the FBI. You don't know that.
I know she's been running for 3 days with a 5-year-old and a stuffed rabbit, and she came to me instead of the police. That tells me everything about her relationship with federal buildings. Another silence. Longer this time. Zara could feel Yoon's frustration through the floor,
rising like heat. "What do you want me to do?" Yoon asked. The question was sharp, pointed, not a request for guidance, a challenge. A man testing the fence to see where it bent. "Nothing," Kang said. "You do nothing. You don't approach her. You don't send men near her. You don't make decisions about her without my direct order. Are we clear?" "We're clear." Footsteps, moving away. A door closing somewhere below. Zara exhaled. Her hands were shaking. She gripped them together, squeezed until the knuckles whitened, then released. A trick she'd learned in nursing school during her first Code Blue. When the body panics, give the hands something to fight. "Mama?" Nyla was awake. Sitting up in bed, Mister tucked under one arm, her eyes already scanning the room the way she always did. Corners first, doors second, windows third. A 5-year-old running a security check every time she opened her eyes. That was the part that made Zara want to scream. Not the running, not the fear. The fact that her daughter had developed the habits of a hunted animal and thought it was normal. "Morning, baby. Are we still at the food man's place?" The food man, Zara almost smiled. "Yeah, we're still here." "It smells good, like breakfast." "It does." "Is Mister allowed to eat breakfast too?" "I think Mister would like that." Nyla swung her legs off the bed. Her 2 big shoes were on the floor, the newspaper stuffing poking out of the toes like confetti. She jammed her feet in anyway, stood up, and walked to the door with the confidence of a child who had decided that today, at least, the world was not going to hurt her. That confidence was a gift Zara gave her every morning. Not with words, with posture. With the set of her shoulders and the steadiness of her voice. Because children don't read speeches, they read bodies. And Zara's body, every single morning, said, "We are fine, we are fine, we are fine." Even when they were not. Downstairs, Bae had set out a breakfast that could have fed 6 people. Rice porridge, steamed eggs, pickled radish, sliced fruit, pear and mandarin oranges arranged on a blue plate, with the precision of a man who believed that how food looked was the first form of respect. Nyla climbed onto a stool at the prep table and immediately began sorting her rice porridge with a spoon, pushing the thick parts to one side and the thin parts to the other. Bae watched this from the stove with an expression that was either fascination or deep personal offense. "She doesn't like it mixed?" he asked Zara in English. "She has a system." Bae grunted. "System. My wife had a system. Drove me crazy 40 years. He paused. "I miss it every day." He turned back to the stove and began preparing something in a small pot. Ginger, honey, water. Zara watched his hands. They were old and scarred and moved with the kind of certainty that comes from doing the same thing 10,000 times. There was comfort in those hands, in their steadiness, in the way they chopped and stirred and measured without hesitation. She hadn't felt comfort from a man's hands in 4 years. The thought arrived without permission, and she shut it down. Hard. Filled it in the same locked drawer where she kept the memory of Darnell's laugh, and the way he used to carry Nyla on his shoulders through the grocery store, and the sound of his key in the front door at 11:30 every night after his second shift. The drawer was full, had been full for years, but it never stopped accepting deposits. Kang appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd changed from last night. Dark gray suit now, no tie, the collar of his white shirt open. His hair was wet, he'd shaved. The scar on his jaw looked sharper in the morning light, more deliberate, like someone had drawn it there on purpose to remind the world that this face had a history. He looked at Nyla on the stool, sorting porridge. He looked at Zara standing near the counter with a cup of tea she hadn't drunk yet. And for a moment, just a moment, barely a heartbeat, something crossed his face that didn't belong there. Something warm and lost and almost human. Then it was gone. "I made some calls," he said. "Darnell Hollis, parking garage, Southside, 4 years ago." Zara set down her tea. Her hand was steady. Her heart was not. And there are things I need to find out before I can answer your questions. But I want you to know that I'm looking. Personally. What does that mean? Personally. It means I'm not delegating this. Not to Yoon, not to anyone. Whatever happened to your husband, I'm going to find out what it was. Zara studied his face, searching for performance, for the polished sincerity that powerful men wore like cologne, designed to make you feel safe while they decided what to do with you. She didn't find it. What she found instead was worse. She found a man who looked like he was bracing for something. A man whose eyes held the particular stillness of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down, calculating the fall. "Thank you," she said, and meant it, and hated that she meant it, because meaning it was the first step toward depending on him, and depending on anyone was the first step toward losing them, and she had already lost enough for 3 lifetimes. Nyla looked up from her porridge. "Is the food man staying for breakfast?" she asked. Kang looked at the girl. The girl looked back at him with those steady brown eyes, those measuring eyes, those eyes that had walked past guns. "The food man has things to do," Kang said. "You should eat first. Mama says you can't think right when you're hungry." Kang glanced at Zara. One eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch. "Your daughter gives a lot of orders for someone who can't reach the top shelf." Zara didn't smile, but something shifted at the corner of her mouth. The ghost of a smile. The memory of one. "She gets that from her father." The sentence hung in the air. Darnell's name between them again. Not spoken this time. Just present. The way a missing chair at a table is present. You feel the emptiness where it should be. Kang sat down. Bae set a bowl in front of him without being asked. And for 6 minutes, in the back kitchen of a Mafia front restaurant on Michigan Avenue, 3 broken people and a stuffed bunny ate breakfast in silence. Nyla sorted her porridge. Zara held her tea with both hands. Kang ate the way he did everything else, efficiently, quietly, without excess. But he stayed. And staying was the thing Zara noticed most. Because in her experience, men left. They left in parking garages and police reports and 4-month investigations that went nowhere. They left in empty apartments and phone calls that stopped coming. They left. But this man sat at a steel table in his own kitchen and ate porridge next to a child who called him the food man. And he stayed. It was the smallest thing, and it was everything. The file arrived at 11 that morning. Kang was in his office on the 3rd floor, a windowless room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a wall safe behind a painting of the Korean countryside that his mother had bought at a flea market 30 years ago. The painting was terrible. He kept it because her fingerprints were on the frame, and he couldn't bring himself to remove them. His man, Park Jae-won, the one who handled archives and records, and the kind of paperwork that never saw daylight, set a manila folder on the desk without a word and left. Kang opened it. The first page was a summary. Date: October 14th, 4 years ago. Location: parking structure, level 3, South Wabash Avenue. Subject: Darnell Hollis. Age at time of death: 26. Cause: single gunshot wound. Classified by CPD as armed robbery. Case closed February of the following year. Kang turned to the second page. His organization's internal log. The kind of record that existed only in physical form, never digital, never transmitted, kept in a safe that required 2 keys and a combination that changed monthly. Operation: clean corridor. South side transfer route compromised. Civilian witness identified at gas station on Halsted. Subject observed photographing license plates of transport vehicles on 2 occasions. Risk level: moderate. Recommendation: containment. Kang's eyes moved to the authorization line. His signature, his handwriting, his name. Approved. K. So Jin. The date was 14 days before Darnell Hollis died in a parking garage on the south side, with a bullet in his chest and a wallet still in his pocket, that the police called a robbery because calling it anything else would have required them to care. Kang stared at the page. The room was silent. The building was silent. The world had gone silent in the way it goes silent before something collapses. Not quiet, but held, suspended, waiting for the sound of falling. He had signed it. He had signed it and not read the name, because there were dozens of these reports every year, and the names were never names to him. They were classifications, risk levels, problems with solutions. He signed them the way a judge stamps warrants, the way a general approves troop movements, by category, not by face. By category, not by face. But now the category had a face, and the face belonged to a 26-year-old man who had coached Little League on Saturdays and burned pancakes on Sunday mornings and sang off-key in the shower while his infant daughter slept in the next room. And that man's widow was 2 floors below him, eating breakfast in his kitchen, trusting him because her dead husband had once told her that a stranger in an expensive suit had stood between him and violence on a street corner. Kang had saved Darnell Hollis on a Tuesday night in October. And then, 2 years later, he had signed the paper that killed him. He closed the folder. His hands were shaking. Not his fingers, his hands. Both of them. Shaking the way they hadn't shaken since he was 19 years old, bleeding in an alley in Seoul, holding the knife that had given someone else the scar he now carried. He pressed his palms flat against the desk, pressed hard. The wood was solid and cold, and it did not care what he had done. He pressed harder, because if he didn't press hard enough, he was going to be sick. The room tilted, not physically, structurally. The architecture of who Kang So-jin was, the careful construction he'd spent 20 years building. Discipline on top of silence, on top of control, on top of the absolute certainty that everything he did served a purpose, and the purpose justified the cost. All of it was shifting. Cracking. The way a building cracks when the foundation gives way. Not at the top, at the bottom, where nobody sees it until the whole thing comes down. He had killed a good man, not with his hands, not with a gun, with a signature and a system, and the comfortable distance that power puts between a decision and its consequences. And that good man's daughter had walked into his warehouse last night, tugged on his jacket, and called him not a bad man. And that good man's wife was sitting in his kitchen, holding a cup of tea with both hands, trying to decide if it was safe to hope. Kang opened the folder again. He read the operational details. The hit had been assigned to a 2-man crew, contracted outside the organization, Payment routed through a shell company. The crew had been given the target's photo, his vehicle, his schedule. They'd been told to make it look like street crime. But the assignment had been routed through Yoon Tae-hyuk. Kang read that line 3 times. Yoon had managed the operation. Yoon had selected the crew. Yoon had written the risk assessment that classified Darnell Hollis as a moderate threat. Darnell Hollis, who had been taking photographs of license plates at a gas station. License plates. Not names, not shipments, not routes. License plates that a 26-year-old man with a new baby might photograph if he saw something suspicious at a gas station and thought, in the ordinary, civic-minded way of a man who coached Little League, that maybe someone should know about it. Moderate threat. Yoon had classified a man taking cell phone pictures at a gas station as a moderate threat and recommended containment and routed it through the system for Kang's signature. And Kang had signed it because he didn't read the names. He picked up his phone, set it down, picked it up again. His thumb hovered over Yoon's contact. He could feel the rage building in his chest. Hot, pressurized, the kind that doesn't explode but compresses, gets denser, gets heavier, until it becomes something permanent, something load-bearing. He didn't call Yoon, because calling Yoon meant revealing what he knew. And revealing what he knew meant Yoon would understand that Kang was compromised, that a woman and a child had found the crack in his foundation and he couldn't seal it. And Yoon, who had been building his own ambitions quietly for years. Yoon, who handled decisions without authorization and sent men to apartments without permission. Yoon would use that information like a blade. Kang closed the folder. He locked it in the wall safe behind his mother's terrible painting. He sat in the silent room for 11 minutes. He knew it was 11 minutes because he counted each one. Counted them the way a man counts the steps between himself and the edge of something irreversible. Then he stood up. He washed his face in the small bathroom attached to his office. Cold water. No mirror here either. He'd removed this one too. He straightened his collar. He walked downstairs. Zara was sitting in the kitchen, reading a picture book to Nyla. Something about a bear who lost his hat. The girl was on her lap, pointing at the illustrations, asking questions about every page, with the relentless curiosity of a child who was, for the first time in days, not afraid. Zara looked up when he entered. Their eyes met, and Kang understood, with the full, devastating weight of certainty, that he was standing in the same room as the woman whose life he had destroyed. That the warmth she was beginning to show him, tentative, fragile, built on the memory of a dead man's gratitude, was built on a foundation that would collapse the moment she learned what he had done. That everything between them was a lie. Not because he had lied, but because the truth was still in a folder, in a safe, behind a painting. And every second he didn't speak it, silence became the same thing as deception. "You okay?" Zara asked. "You look like you've seen something." Kang forced his expression flat. Years of practice. Decades. "Long morning," he said. "Nyla wants to know if you have any books with dogs in them. She's tired of bears." Kang looked at the girl. Nyla looked back at him with her father's eyes. He knew that now. Darnell's eyes. The eyes of a man he had saved and then killed. Looking at him from the face of a child who trusted him. "I'll find one," he said, and he turned away before his face could betray him. Because the ice hadn't just cracked anymore, it had shattered. And Kang Seo-jin was falling through it into water so cold and so dark that he wasn't sure he'd come back up. The next 36 hours moved like weather. Sometimes fast, chaotic, full of noise and decisions. Sometimes slow, heavy, the kind of stillness that gathers before a storm and makes your teeth ache with waiting. Kong ran his operation from the restaurant. He had a second office here, smaller than the one upstairs, tucked behind the wine cellar, accessible through a door disguised as a storage closet. He took calls, reviewed numbers, managed the machine that ran on schedules and debts, and the quiet understanding that everything had a price. But the machine felt different now. The gears that had always turned smoothly, the mechanisms he'd built with such care, they ground against something new, a friction that hadn't been there before. Every report he read, every decision he approved, he found himself doing something he'd never done. Reading the names. Every single one. It changed nothing on paper. The operations continued, the money moved, the organization functioned the way it always had. Because empires don't stop for one man's crisis of conscience. But something in the engine room had shifted, and the man at the controls knew it, even if no one else could see. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, a different kind of machinery was running. Bay had adopted Nyla. Not formally, not with words. The old chef simply began including the girl in his daily routine, the way a river includes a stone, flowing around her, adjusting, making space. He gave her a stool near the stove. He let her wash vegetables, carefully supervising while pretending not to. He taught her the Korean word for onion, garlic, sesame, rice. Nyla learned them immediately, repeated them with a pronunciation that made Bay's eyebrows climb his forehead. "Your daughter has a Korean ear," he told Zara one afternoon, shaking his head. "My own grandchildren can't say Yangba that clean." Zara watched from the corner of the kitchen, arms folded, the way she watched everything in this building, with one foot already pointed toward the door. She was grateful. She was even, in moments she couldn't control, almost relaxed. But she didn't trust it. Comfort was a drug, and she knew what happened when you got addicted to a place that wasn't yours. You started believing you deserved it. And then it was taken. On the second morning, she told Kong she needed clothes. Real clothes. Her scrubs from the shelter bag smelled like bus exhaust and fear. He sent someone. The clothes that came back were simple, jeans, A sweater, a winter coat that actually fit, but they were new. Tag still on. Her size. "How did you know my size?" she asked. "I didn't. Bay's wife used to be a seamstress. He can measure a person by looking." Zara held up the coat. Charcoal gray. Warm. The kind of coat she'd walked past in store windows for years, calculating in her head. Rent, groceries, Nyla's shoes, electric bill. The coat always lost. "I'll pay you back," she said. "No." "I will." Zara. His voice was careful. He said her name carefully now, like it was something he was afraid of dropping. "You don't owe me anything." She stared at him, and something in her gaze shifted. A crack in the wall she'd built, small but visible. Not warmth, not yet, but the absence of cold. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Not angry, not suspicious, just tired. Tired of trying to figure out the angle when maybe there wasn't one. Kang didn't answer right away. He was looking at her hands. She'd been washing dishes, Bay's dishes, because she couldn't sit idle, couldn't accept shelter without contributing something, anything, to justify the space she occupied. Her hands were wet and reddened and strong. A nurse's hands, a mother's hands. Hands that had held dying patients and a newborn and a steering wheel at 3 a.m. on a highway out of town with a child asleep in the back seat. Because I owe a debt, he said. Not to you. To someone I didn't protect when I should have. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her, and the most dishonest, because the someone he didn't protect was her husband, and the reason he didn't protect him was that he'd signed the order that ended his life. But she didn't know that, and the gap between what she knew and what he knew was growing wider every hour. And the wider it grew, the more impossible it became to close. Because closing it meant telling her, and telling her meant watching the crack in her wall, that small, precious absence of cold, seal shut forever. So he said nothing more, and the debt grew heavier. That evening, Nyla discovered the piano. It was in the dining room, near the window, a baby grand that King's mother had insisted on when the restaurant opened 15 years ago. Nobody played it anymore. It sat there like a monument to a time when the business had still pretended to be about food and music and gathering. Nyla climbed onto the bench and pressed a key. Middle C. The note rang out in the empty dining room, clean and bright and startling in a building that was used to whispers. She pressed another, then another. Random notes. No melody, just sound. Exploration. The pure, aimless curiosity of a child discovering that the world could make noises she controlled. Zara came out of the kitchen, stopped in the doorway, watched. Kang came down the stairs, stopped on the last step, watched. And for a moment, just a moment held together by piano notes that meant nothing and everything, the three of them existed in a space that had no fear in it. No files, no 72-hour countdowns, no secrets locked in safes. Just sound and warmth, and a little girl with her tongue between her teeth, pressing keys with one finger, building a song out of nothing. Bae came out of the kitchen, drying his hands on his apron. She has a Korean ear and American rhythm, he said. That girl is going to be trouble. Nobody laughed. But something lighter than laughter moved through the room. A breath. A release. The kind of exhale that happens when a body that's been clenched for days finally remembers how to let go. Then Kang's phone buzzed. The sound was small, ordinary. A phone buzzing in a pocket, the most common sound in the world. But it landed in the room like a rock through glass. Kang looked at the screen. Yoon. He answered it in the hallway, out of earshot. The 72 hours are up tonight, Yoon said. No greeting, no preamble. The Hollis woman. I need to know your decision. My decision is the same. Nothing happens to her. Silence on the line. The dangerous kind. Boss. With respect, she's a witness to a federal-level operation. Every hour she's in that building, she's a liability to everything we've built. The men are talking. They're asking why a black woman and her kid are eating in the back kitchen like family. It doesn't look right. I don't care how it looks. You should. Because perception is governance. You taught me that. Yoon paused, let the quote sit there. A student throwing the teacher's words back like a blade. If you won't handle this, I need to know. Because the organization needs to know where you stand. The words landed with precision. Kang recognized the architecture. He'd built it himself. The careful framing. The appeal to structure. The implicit threat wrapped in loyalty's language. Yoon wasn't asking for permission anymore. He was positioning. I'll handle it, Kang said. My way. On my timeline. What timeline is that? The one where you remember who you work for. He hung up, stood in the hallway, listened to Nyla's piano notes drifting from the dining room, random and beautiful, and completely unaware of what was building on the other side of the walls. The 72 hours were up. Yoon was moving from lieutenant to threat. The file in the safe was a bomb with a lit fuse. And somewhere between the piano notes and the phone call, between the smell of Bei's kitchen and the sound of Yoon's calculation, Kang So-jin realized something that terrified him more than any rival, any weapon, any betrayal ever had. He cared. Not abstractly, not strategically, not the way a chess player cares about pieces on a board. He cared about the woman in his kitchen, who washed dishes she didn't have to wash, and refused to accept a coat without promising to pay it back. He cared about the girl on the piano bench, who had walked past guns to reach a crying man. He cared about the sound of someone calling him the food man and meaning it as a compliment. And caring, in his world, in his life, in the machine he had built from silence and discipline, and the absolute refusal to let anything matter, was the most dangerous thing he had ever done. More dangerous than the gun he dropped on the warehouse floor. More dangerous than the file in the safe. Because the gun could be picked up, and the file could stay locked. But caring, once it started, could not be undone. And Kang So-jin, who had controlled every variable in his life for 20 years, had just discovered the one thing he couldn't control. The sound of a 5-year-old girl playing piano in a room full of ghosts. And the way it made him feel like the room might not be haunted anymore. It happened on the 4th night. Zara couldn't sleep. The building was quiet, the restaurant closed, the kitchen dark, the city outside reduced to sirens and distant traffic, and the low hum of a world that never fully shut down. Nyla was asleep upstairs, Mister locked in her grip, her breathing slow and steady. Safe. For now. Zara had been sleeping in fragments. 20 minutes here, an hour there. Never deep, never fully gone. Her body had forgotten how to surrender to sleep, the way it had forgotten how to sit in a chair without planning the fastest route to the exit. 4 years of running will do that. It rewires you. Turns rest into a luxury your nervous system can't afford. She went downstairs to find water. The kitchen was dark except for the blue glow of the industrial refrigerator and a strip of light leaking from under the hallway door. She filled a glass from the tap, drank it standing up, filled it again. And then she heard Kang's voice, not from the hallway, from below, the basement. Muffled through the floor, but close enough that she could feel the vibration of it in the soles of her bare feet. He was talking to someone. The tone was wrong. Not the measured, careful cadence she'd come to recognize, but something ragged, something fraying at the edges. She shouldn't have followed the sound. She knew that. Every survival instinct she'd built over 4 years told her to go back upstairs, lock the door, hold her daughter, and wait for morning. Don't ask questions. Don't look for answers. Don't open doors that weren't meant for you. But Zara Hollis had been surviving for 4 years, and somewhere in the last 72 hours, surviving had stopped being enough. She wanted to understand. She wanted to know who this man was, not the version he showed her, careful and controlled and almost gentle. The real version. The one that existed behind the locked doors and the missing mirrors and the calls he took in hallways with his back turned. She found the basement door behind the wine cellar. It was ajar. Voices drifted up. Kang's and another man. Not Yoon, someone older, calmer, speaking Korean. Zara didn't speak Korean, but she understood tone, and the tone of this conversation was a wound being examined. She descended 3 steps, just enough to hear. The older man was speaking. His voice carried the rasp of cigarettes and years. She caught fragments of English woven into the Korean, names, dates, street names. She heard Hollis. She heard Southside. She heard 4 years. Her blood stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The way blood stops when the brain receives information that the body isn't ready to process. A full system pause. Everything suspended. She heard Kong's voice. Low. Strained. I signed it. I didn't read the name, but I signed it. Silence. Then the older man again. More Korean. Something that sounded like a question. And Kong, in English this time, clear enough that every word reached her on the stairs like a hand around her throat. He was 26. He had a baby.
And I signed the order because I didn't think the name mattered. The glass slipped from Zara's hand. It didn't shatter, it bounced off the carpeted step with a dull thud. And rolled to the bottom, hitting the concrete floor with a sound like a bell struck once. Small. Clear. Final. The voices stopped. Zara didn't move. She couldn't. Her body had locked in the position of a woman who has just heard the thing she cannot unhear. Hands empty, feet bare, standing on a dark staircase in a building owned by the man who killed her husband. Footsteps below. The basement door opened wider, and light poured up the stairs, and Kong was standing at the bottom, looking up at her. His face white, his eyes holding something she'd never seen in them before. Not control, not calculation, not the careful blankness he wore like armor. Fear. Raw.
Exposed, crumbling fear. The fear of a man who has been found out. Zara. Don't. The word came out like a blade, thin and sharp and final. Don't say my name. Don't say anything. She was shaking. Not trembling. Shaking. The kind of full-body shaking that starts in the chest and radiates outward until even your vision vibrates. She gripped the stair rails so hard the wood creaked. You killed him. Zara, let me. You killed him! Not a question. A verdict. Delivered on a dark staircase at 3 a.m. by a woman in bare feet who had walked into this building 4 days ago because her dead husband had once told her that the man inside was proof that decency still existed. Proof. She had walked through his door carrying Darnell's faith like a lantern, and the man holding the other end of that light had been the one who blew it out. The older man appeared behind Kang, silver-haired, lean. He took one look at Zara's face and stepped back into the basement without a word. He understood what was happening. The way old men understand storms. Not the physics, just the inevitability. Kang came up the stairs, slowly, hands visible. The same posture he'd used in the warehouse, non-threatening, controlled, calculated. But Zara saw through it now. Saw it for what it was. Performance. The careful choreography of a man who managed people the way he managed operations. With precision. With strategy. With the absolute certainty that every interaction could be controlled if you knew the right moves. Stop walking toward me. He stopped. 3 steps below her. The light from the basement cut his face in half. One side lit, one side in shadow. It looked like a metaphor she didn't want to understand. I didn't know it was him, Kang said. I signed an order. A name on a report. You didn't read it. No. You didn't read the name of the man you were killing. No. Because the name didn't matter. He said nothing. Because to you, he wasn't a person. He was a category, a risk level, a problem with a solution. Yes. The honesty was worse than a lie. A lie she could have fought, could have torn apart, used the pieces to build more wall between them. But the truth, this truth, spoken on a staircase in a voice stripped of everything she'd ever heard in it, the truth just sat there, heavy, immovable, impossible to argue with. He had killed Darnell. Not with intent, not with malice, with indifference. The most devastating weapon in the world. The weapon that says, your life wasn't important enough for me to pause. My daughter, Zara said. Her voice cracked for the first time. Not on the words, between them. In the silence where the air should have been. My daughter walked into your warehouse and called you not a bad man. She defended you. She walked past guns for you. She talks to your chef and plays your piano and sorts her rice while you sit across from her and smile. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and she has her father's eyes. Did you notice that? His exact eyes. The eyes of the man you didn't bother to read the name of before you signed him away. Kong's hands dropped to his sides, his shoulders lowered. The architecture of him, the posture, the control, the 20 years of practiced stillness, crumbled. Not dramatically, not like a building falling, like sand, grain by grain, until what was left was just a man on a staircase who had run out of structure to hold himself up. I noticed, he said. I noticed the moment she looked at me. Zara pressed her hand against the wall. She needed something solid, something that wasn't him, something that wouldn't turn out to be built on a lie. I'm taking my daughter, she said, and I'm leaving. Tonight. You can't leave. Yoon, don't you dare use his name to keep me here. Don't you dare make your mess my cage. If you leave this building, Yoon will find you. He has men watching the exits. He has men at your apartment. He has men at the shelter where you stayed last week. I am the only thing standing between you and a man who has already decided you're a loose end. And what are you? What are you standing between us? The man who killed my husband wants to protect the wife? Is that it? Is that the story you're telling yourself? I'm not telling myself a story. I'm telling you the truth. The truth. She almost laughed. It came out as something else, a sound that had no name, caught between grief and rage and the kind of exhaustion that settles in your bones and never fully leaves. The truth is that my daughter loves your chef. The truth is that she asked me this morning if we could stay. The truth is that for the first time in 4 years, she stopped checking the exits when she walks into a room. And now I have to take that from her. Because of you. She turned and walked up the stairs. Zara, she didn't stop. I'm going to fix this. She stopped. Not because she believed him, but because the word fix hit something in her chest that was still alive despite everything. Still stubbornly, stupidly alive. She didn't turn around. You can't fix dead, she said. You can't fix 4 years of my daughter asking why Daddy doesn't come home. You can't fix the sound she makes in her sleep when she's dreaming about him. This little sound, like she's reaching for something she can't find. Her voice broke. You can't fix that. She walked up the stairs and into the dark. And Kang So-jin stood on the staircase alone, in the light from a basement where the truth had finally been spoken, and felt the full weight of what he had done settle onto his shoulders like concrete. Not the killing. He had carried killings before. The weight of violence was familiar. Heavy, yes, but distributable. You could spread it across justifications and necessities and the cold logic of an organization that ran on rules he hadn't invented but had chosen to enforce. This was different. This was the weight of a 5-year-old girl who had walked past guns because she believed he was worth reaching. This was the weight of a woman who had carried her husband's faith across 4 years of darkness and handed it to the man who put out the light. This was the weight of a name he didn't read, and it was heavier than everything else combined. She didn't leave, not because she forgave him, not because she believed his promises, not because the rage had faded. It hadn't. It sat in her chest like a coal, hot and constant and alive. She didn't leave because at 4 a.m, she packed Nyla's things into the shelter bag and picked up her daughter and walked to the back door of the restaurant and opened it, and looked out into the January dark, and across the alley, under a streetlight, a black sedan sat with its engine running and 2 men inside. Watching. Waiting. Yoon's men. Zara closed the door. She stood in the dark kitchen with her daughter in her arms and her back against the door, and understood, not with her mind, but with her body, with the animal part of her that had kept her alive for 4 years, that the cage she was in had no exit that didn't lead to a worse cage. She was trapped between the man who killed her husband and the man who wanted to kill her. And the only difference between them was that one of them had looked her in the eye and said he was sorry. She carried Nyla back upstairs, laid her on the bed. The girl didn't wake. Children who've learned to sleep through fear sleep heavy when they finally feel safe. Even false safety, even temporary safety. The body takes what it can get. Zara sat on the floor beside the bed with her back against the wall. She didn't sleep. She didn't cry. She stared at the door and waited for morning, the way prisoners wait for morning. Not with hope, but with the grim patience of someone who has accepted that the next day will come whether they're ready for it or not. Morning arrived grey and cold. Snow had started in the night. Light, steady, the kind that accumulates so slowly you don't notice until the world is white. Kang was in the kitchen when she came down. He looked like he hadn't slept. His suit was wrinkled, the first time she'd seen him less than immaculate. His jaw was tight. His eyes carried the particular darkness of a man who had spent the night in conversation with his own reflection and lost the argument. He'd made coffee. That detail almost broke her, because it was such a small, human, ordinary thing to do. Make coffee for a woman who hated you. And it didn't match the man in the file. Didn't match the signature on a kill order. Didn't match the system he'd built, or the empire he ran, or the silence he'd wrapped around himself like bandages over a wound he wouldn't let anyone see. "I'm not drinking your coffee," she said. "It's on the counter if you change your mind." Nyla appeared in the doorway, mister under one arm, hair wild from sleep. She looked at Kang, then at Zara, then back at Kang. Children are seismographs. They feel the tremors adults try to hide. And right now, the ground between her mother and the food man was shaking. "Are you fighting?" Nyla asked. "No, baby," Zara said. "Your face says fighting." Nyla walked to the counter and pulled herself up onto her stool. Bay wasn't there yet. The kitchen felt emptier without him, colder, like the warmth of the building was connected to the old man's presence. "I want porridge," Nyla said. Then, looking at Kang, "The sticky kind." Kang looked at Zara, asking permission, not with words, with the slight raise of his eyebrows, the pause before moving. A man asking a woman he'd devastated whether he was still allowed to feed her child. Zara said nothing, which was not the same as yes, but it wasn't no. Kang cooked porridge. He moved through the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had learned to cook in a professional space, where everything is, what goes with what, how long rice takes when you're using this pot versus that one. Bae had taught him years ago in the early days of the restaurant, before the business became what it became, before the kitchen became a front, and the dining room became a meeting ground, and the whole building became a machine designed to look like something it wasn't. He set the bowl in front of Nyla. The girl began sorting immediately, sticky to the left, fluffy to the right. The same ritual, the same careful, concentrated face. Your mom used to do this, Kang said. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Not to Nyla, to Zara. Across the kitchen. A sentence that reached across the chasm between them and landed with the delicacy of a stone dropped into still water. What? Zara's voice was sharp. Sort rice. My mother. She said the sticky ones had more soul. He paused. I told you that before. I remember. I'm telling you again because I want you to know that when I watch your daughter sort rice in my kitchen, I don't see a liability or a problem or a risk level. I see a child doing something my mother did. And it makes me feel something I haven't felt in 20 years. Zara's jaw tightened. I don't care what you feel. I know. Your feelings aren't the point. Darnell is the point. My daughter growing up without a father is the point. Your signature on a piece of paper is the point. I know. Stop saying I know. You don't know. You can't know. You went home that night after signing that paper and ate dinner and slept and woke up and did it again. And I got a phone call at 2 a.m. from a detective who couldn't even pronounce my husband's last name right. Her voice was rising, not screaming, rising. The controlled escalation of a woman who had held this inside for 4 years and was finally standing in front of someone who deserved to hear it. They said robbery. They said wrong place, wrong time. They said these things happen. Like losing the man I was building a life with was a weather event. Like it just blew in. Like nobody caused it. Nyla stopped sorting rice. She was watching her mother with those steady eyes, alert, measuring. Zara saw her daughter watching and pulled herself back from the edge. Physically, she straightened her spine, unclenched her hands, took a breath that went all the way down to her stomach. The mother override, the mechanism that forces you to swallow your own fire so your child doesn't burn. Eat your porridge, baby, Zara said. Her voice was level, almost normal. Nyla looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Kang. She's sad because of you, Nyla said. Not accusing, just stating. The way a child states facts, clean, unvarnished, without strategy. You made her sad. Kang looked at the girl, at Darnell's eyes in Darnell's daughter's face, at the trust he'd been given and didn't deserve and couldn't return. Yes, he said. I did. Are you going to fix it? The question landed like a stone in a cathedral, small and enormous at the same time. I'm going to try, Kang said. I'm going to try harder than I've ever tried to do anything. Nyla considered this. She picked up her spoon, took a bite of sticky rice. Okay, she said, but you should know. Mama doesn't give second chances. She gave Daddy's friend Marcus a second chance, and he stole our TV. Despite everything, despite the rage and the grief and the staircase and the file and the men outside and the empire crumbling around him, Kang almost smiled. Almost. I won't steal the TV, he said. Good, Nyla took another bite. Because we don't have one anymore. Zara turned away, but not before Kang saw it, the flicker at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile, not forgiveness, Not anything he had earned or deserved. Just the involuntary response of a mother hearing her daughter be funny in the middle of a war zone. A tiny, human, uncontrollable moment of light in a room full of dark. It lasted less than a second, but Kang held onto it the way a drowning man holds onto a rope. Because it meant that the door, the one Zara had slammed shut on the staircase, the one built from grief and betrayal and 4 years of raising a child alone, wasn't locked. It was closed, but it wasn't locked. And in Kang Sojin's world, where locked doors were a specialty, the difference between closed and locked was everything. The call came at 6 in the evening on the 5th day. Kang was in the wine cellar office, reviewing the file for the 11th time. He'd memorized every line, the dates, the signatures, the operational chain that had carried a man's death from a report on a desk to a bullet in a parking garage. He'd traced every link, looking for something. Not absolution, there was no absolution, but understanding. How the machine had taken a man who photographed license plates and turned him into a moderate threat, and then turned the moderate threat into a body, and then turned the body into a closed case. He understood now. That was the worst part. He understood perfectly. The machine worked exactly the way he'd designed it to work. Clean, efficient, impersonal. Every step justified by the step before it. Every decision insulated from its consequences by layers of delegation and protocol, and the careful, deliberate distance between the man who signs and the man who bleeds. He had built this. And a 26-year-old man who burned pancakes on Sundays had died inside it. His phone rang. The screen showed a number he didn't recognize. He answered.
Kang Sojin. The voice was female, professional, cold. This is Agent Diane Coulter, FBI, Organized Crime Task Force. I'm going to be direct with you because I respect your intelligence. And I don't have time for games. Kang said nothing. We know you have Zara Hollis in your building. We know your Lieutenant Yoon Taehyuk has been operating a parallel command structure within your organization for the past 18 months. We know about the Cermak shipments, and we know that 4 years ago, your organization ordered the death of a civilian named Darnell Hollis. Kang closed his eyes. Here's what I'm offering, Agent Coulter continued. You give us Yoon. Full cooperation, testimony on the Cermak operation and the Hollis killing. In exchange, you walk. Reduced charges. No prison time. New identity if you want it. And Zara?
Ms. Hollis enters witness protection. New city, new name, full support. Her daughter, too. She disappears. She survives, which is more than she'll do if Yoon gets to her first. Kang opened his eyes, stared at the wall. His mother's terrible painting hung in his office upstairs, her fingerprint still on the frame. Bae was probably in the kitchen right now, teaching Nyla another Korean word. Zara was probably sitting in the corner, arms folded, watching everything, trusting nothing. How long do I have? He asked. Yoon is meeting with the heads of 3 affiliated families tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, the Hanul private dining room. He's presenting a leadership transition, his version of events, his case for taking control. If you don't act before that meeting, you won't be in a position to act at all. You seem to know a lot about my organization's internal schedule. We've been inside your organization for 14 months, Mr. Kang. The question isn't what we know, it's what you're going to do with the time you have left. She hung up. Kang set the phone on the desk. The screen went dark. The room was silent except for the hum of the building's old pipes and the muffled sound of the kitchen above him. He could hear Nyla's voice, faint, high, asking Bae something. He couldn't make out the words, just the sound. the melody of a child who had stopped being afraid. He picked up the file. Darnell Hollis, 26, father, husband, coach, civilian. He picked up the phone again and dialed Park J1. I need you to pull everything on Yoon Tae-hyuk, everything, not just operations, finances, communications, side deals, anything off book. I need it by midnight. How far back? 4 years. Start with the Hollis operation. I want to know every decision he made that didn't come through me. Boss, if I pull those records, people will talk. Yoon has people in the archive room. Let them talk. By tomorrow night, it won't matter. He hung up, stood, straightened his jacket out of habit, the way a soldier adjusts his uniform before walking into the place from which he might not return. He went upstairs. Zara was in the kitchen. She'd been avoiding him for 2 days, not dramatically, not with confrontation, but with the quiet, surgical precision of a woman who could occupy the same building as a man and make him feel like he existed in a different dimension. She spoke to Bae. She spoke to Nyla. She answered Kang's questions with the minimum number of words required, and then returned to the silence she'd built between them like a wall made of ice. Clear enough to see through, cold enough to stop you from crossing. She was washing dishes. Again. Bae's dishes. Dishes that were already clean. Zara. She didn't turn. I need to talk to you. You've been talking for 5 days. I haven't heard anything worth listening to. This is different. Something in his voice made her stop. Not the words, the weight behind them. She'd learned to read his voice the way she read vital signs. Rhythm, pressure, the subtle changes that signal something critical before the alarms go off. She turned off the water, dried her hands on a towel, turned to face him. The FBI called me, he said. They know you're here. They know about Yoon. They're offering me a deal. I give them Yoon, I cooperate on the Cermak case and on Darnell's case, and in return, reduced charges. Zara's face didn't change, but her hands tightened on the towel. And me? Witness protection, new city, new name, you and Nyla. Another disappearance, another city where nobody knows us, another apartment where Nyla starts over in a new school, and I start over at a new job, and we pretend the last 5 years didn't happen. You'd be alive. I've been alive for 4 years. Surviving isn't the same as living. Kang took a step toward her. She didn't retreat, didn't flinch, just stood there, towel in her hands, brown eyes steady, the look of a woman who had stopped being afraid of him and started being afraid of something else. The possibility that he might actually be trying to do the right thing, and that doing the right thing might not be enough. There's another option, he said. What option? Yoon is meeting the family heads tomorrow night. Here, in the private dining room. He's staging a takeover, presenting himself as the new leader, making his case that I've been compromised. Have you been compromised? Yes. No hesitation. No qualification. By a 5-year-old girl who plays piano with one finger, and the woman who washes dishes that are already clean. Zara's jaw tightened. She didn't want to hear this. Didn't want the softness of it. Didn't want the way his voice dropped when he said it. The way his eyes held hers, with something that wasn't performance or strategy, but the raw, unprotected gaze of a man who had dismantled his own armor and was standing in front of her with nothing left. Don't, she said. I'm going to walk into that meeting tomorrow night, he continued. And I'm going to do something I've never done in 20 years. I'm going to tell the truth. In front of every family head. In front of Yoon. In front of the men who followed me because they believed the machine was clean. I'm going to tell them what Yoon did to your husband. what I signed, what the organization has become, and I'm going to let them decide what happens next. They'll kill you. Maybe. Maybe is not a plan. Maybe is a death wish. It's not a death wish. It's the only way this ends without you running for the rest of your life. He paused. If I give you to the FBI, you're safe, but you're erased. New name, new city. Nyla grows up as someone else, and the men who killed Darnell, the system that killed him, keeps running. Just under new management. He stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the vein in his temple. The slight tremor in his left hand. The way his breathing had changed, shorter, faster. The rhythm of a man standing at the edge of something he couldn't take back. Or I walk into that room and I burn it down, not with a match. With the truth. And when it's done, Yoon faces federal charges for Darnell's murder. The operation goes down. And you and Nyla, you keep your names, you keep your lives. You don't have to disappear. And what happens to you? I face charges too, for what I signed, for what I built. For 20 years of decisions that had consequences I chose not to look at. Prison. Probably. And you'd do that. I'd do that. Why? He looked at her, and for once, for the first and only time since she'd walked through his door, his face held nothing back. No mask, no strategy. No careful construction. Just a 43-year-old man who had built an empire on silence. And was about to tear it down with the only thing he had left. The truth. Because your daughter asked me if I was going to fix it, he said. And I told her I'd try. And I have done a lot of terrible things in my life, Zara. Things that can't be undone. Things that keep me up at night. In a room with no mirror, because I can't stand to look at my own face. But I am not going to add lying to a 5-year-old girl to that list. Zara stared at him. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere above them, Nyla's voice drifted down. She was talking to Mr., narrating something about a princess who lived in a restaurant and had a pet bear named Bay. You're asking me to trust you, Zara said. No, I'm asking you to let me earn something I haven't earned yet. What's the difference? Trust is something you give. This is something I take responsibility for. Whether you trust me or not, I'm walking into that room tomorrow. She studied him, the way she'd studied him from the first moment in the alley, reading not his words but his body, his hands, his eyes, the spaces between what he said and what he meant. She found no lie. And this time, instead of scaring her, it made her tired. Bone-deep, cellular tired. The tiredness of a woman who had been holding up walls for 4 years and had just been told she could set them down. Not because the danger was gone, but because someone else was willing to stand in front of it. If you get yourself killed tomorrow, she said, I'm going to be very angry with you. It was not forgiveness. It was not trust. But it was a door. The closed, not locked door, opening 1 inch. And Khan took that inch the way a man dying of thirst takes a single drop of water. With his whole body. With everything he had left. The next 18 hours passed in a kind of suspended gravity. The building held its breath. Kong made calls. Quiet ones. Strategic. Park Jae-won delivered the files at midnight. 3 years of Yoon's off-book operations, unauthorized hits, skimmed revenue, and a side deal with a rival family that would have gotten him killed if Kong had found it 6 months earlier. Kong read every page, every name. This time, he read every single name. At dawn, he sat in the kitchen. Bae was there, making tea the way he always did, in silence, with precision. Each movement a small ceremony of habit and care. The old man set a cup in front of Kong without speaking. Kong wrapped his hands around it. Bae. If something happens tonight, take care of them. Bae looked at him. Those old eyes, deep set and steady, holding decades of things they'd seen and chosen not to speak about. You're doing the right thing, Bae said in Korean. For the wrong reasons, but the right thing. What are the wrong reasons? You're not doing it because it's right. You're doing it because a woman made you feel ashamed. Bae paused. But shame that leads to truth is still truth. So drink your tea and stop talking. Kang drank his tea. At 7:30 that evening, the first car arrived. Black sedan, tinted windows. 2 men in suits flanked the passenger as he entered through the back. Hwang Do-yoon, head of the Hwang family, who controlled the port operations. He was 62, thin, gray at the temples. He walked like a man who had never been in a room that didn't belong to him. At 7:40, the second car. Shin Myung-ho, who ran the north side. Younger, sharper. A gold watch that cost more than the building's monthly rent. At 7:50, Yoon arrived. He came through the front door, which was a statement. A man who enters through the front is telling everyone he considers himself the host. He wore a black suit, no tie. His shoes were polished to the point of aggression. He walked past Bae without acknowledging him, past the kitchen, where Zara sat with Nyla on her lap, past the dining room, where the piano stood silent. He went upstairs to the private dining room. At 7:55, the third family head arrived. Park Sung-min, the oldest of them, 71. He'd known Kang's father. He walked with a cane and carried 71 years of debts and loyalties in his head like a filing cabinet. At 8 o'clock, they were all seated. 5 men around a long table in a room that smelled like aged wood and money. Crystal glasses, an untouched bottle of soju. The quiet, electric tension of powerful men who know that the shape of the room is about to change. Yoon stood at the head of the table. He'd positioned himself there deliberately. The head, where Kong always sat. Another statement. Gentlemen, Yoon began. Thank you for coming. I know this meeting is unusual, but the circumstances are unusual. He paused, made eye contact with each man. Controlled, commanding. He'd rehearsed this. Kong could tell, the way the pauses landed, the rhythm of the words. Yoon had practiced in a mirror. A man who still had mirrors. For the past week, Kang So-jin has been harboring a federal witness in this building. A woman who can identify our Cermak operation. A woman who, every hour she remains alive, represents an existential threat to this organization. The room was silent. The family heads listened with the practiced stillness of men who had survived decades by hearing everything and reacting to nothing. I've attempted to resolve this through proper channels, Yoon continued. But Kong has refused. He's developed a personal attachment to this woman. A weakness that compromises his judgment and, by extension, compromises all of us. He set a folder on the table. Photographs. The loading bay. Zara's face caught by a security camera. The restaurant exterior with a woman and child visible through the back window. I'm not calling for a vote of no confidence, Yoon said. I'm calling for clarity. If Kong cannot act in the organization's interest, then someone must. He sat down. The room waited. And then the door opened. Kang So-jin walked in. He was not wearing a suit. He wore a simple white shirt. Sleeves rolled to the forearm. No cufflinks, no jacket, no armor. He looked like a man who had taken off everything that wasn't necessary and kept only what was real. He carried a file. He walked past Yoon without looking at him, past the family heads, past the crystal glasses and the untouched soju. He walked to the head of the table, his seat, the seat Yoon had claimed, and he didn't sit down. He stood, and he set the file on the table. 4 years ago, Kang said, this organization killed a man named Darnell Hollis. The room contracted. Every man at the table felt it. The shift in pressure, the change in the air. He was 26 years old. He was a father, a coach, a husband. He worked 2 jobs, and he made pancakes on Sundays that he always burned. And his daughter was 11 months old when he died. Kang opened the file. He was classified as a moderate threat because he took photographs of license plates at a gas station. He was not a witness. He was not an informant. He was a man who saw something suspicious and did what any decent citizen would do. He slid the kill order to the center of the table, his signature visible at the bottom. I signed this. I didn't read his name. I didn't ask who he was, or what he'd done, or whether he deserved what was coming. I signed it because the system I built was designed to make signing easy and thinking unnecessary. He looked at Yoon, and the man who classified Darnell Hollis as a moderate threat, who wrote the assessment, selected the crew, managed the operation, and presented it for my signature, is the same man who just stood before you and called himself the future of this organization. Yoon's face was stone, but his hands, flat on the table, had gone white at the knuckles. This is not about a woman in my kitchen, Kang said. This is about what we've become, what I let us become. An organization that kills fathers and calls it containment, that eliminates civilians and files it under operations, that runs on a system so clean and efficient that the man at the top never has to look at what's happening at the bottom. He turned to the family heads, 3 men who had seen everything, who had survived wars and betrayals and decades of exactly this kind of room. They watched him with the careful attention of men who understood that what was happening was unprecedented. A boss confessing in front of his own people. Not because he'd been caught, because he'd chosen to speak. I am responsible, Kang said, for Darnell Hollis, for the system that killed him, for every name I didn't read. But I am also responsible for what happens next. And what happens next is this. Yoon Tae-hyuk faces federal charges for the unauthorized killing of a civilian, and for 18 months of off-book operations that he ran without my knowledge or approval. He dropped the second file on the table. Yoon's file. Park Jae-won's midnight delivery. 3 years of skimming, side deals, unauthorized hits. Pages and pages of a lieutenant building his own empire inside the walls of someone else's. Yoon stood. His chair scraped against the hardwood floor. You're finished, Kang. You know that. You walked in here without a weapon, without allies, and confessed to a federal crime in front of 3 witnesses. You're done. Probably, Kang said, but I'm done on my terms, not yours. He turned to Park Sung-min, the oldest family head, the man who'd known his father. Uncle, he said, the Korean honorific, respectful, deliberate. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to protect them. The woman downstairs and her daughter. They have nothing to do with our world. They never did. And they deserve to walk out of this building with their names and their lives and the chance to start over without looking over their shoulders. Park Sung-min looked at Kang for a long time. His face was unreadable. 71 years of masks, layered one on top of another. Then he spoke, in Korean, slowly. Each word placed with the care of a man who understood that what he said next would echo. Your father, he said, would be ashamed of what this organization has become. But he would be proud of what you're doing right now. He turned to Yoon. Sit down. Yoon didn't move. I said sit down. Yoon sat. Park Sungmin looked at the other two family heads, something passed between them. The silent consensus of men who had been reading rooms longer than most people had been alive. The woman and the child are under our protection, Park Sungmin said. Yoon Taehyuk will face the consequences of his actions. And Kang Seojin will face his. He paused. But he faces them as a man who told the truth. And in this room, that still means something. Kang nodded once. A small motion, the motion of a man who had just set down the heaviest thing he'd ever carried and was still learning how to stand without it. Yoon was escorted out by two of Park Sung-min's men. He went without a word, but his eyes, flat, dark, calculating, found Kang's face as he passed. And in them, Kang saw not rage or defeat, but something worse. Patience. The patience of a man who believed that time was on his side. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, there was only one thing left to do. Kang walked downstairs, through the dining room where the piano sat silent, past the kitchen where Bae was wiping down a counter that was already clean, down the narrow hallway that smelled like ginger and old wood. Zara was sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, the same staircase where, 3 nights ago, she had heard the truth and the world had broken open. She was holding Nyla's hand. The girl was beside her, awake, Mister on her lap, both of them sitting on the stairs like passengers at a train station, waiting for a departure time that nobody had announced. Zara looked up at him. She didn't ask what happened. She read it on his face. It's done, he said. What's done? Yoon is gone. The family heads have guaranteed your safety. You and Nyla can leave this building whenever you want. Your names. Your lives. Nothing taken. Zara stared at him. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was tight, and she did not cry. She would not cry. Not in front of him. Not in front of anyone. She had cried alone in parked cars and bathroom stalls and under shower water at 2 a.m. for 4 years. And she was not going to change that pattern now. And you? She asked. I face charges for what I signed. The FBI is being contacted tonight. Prison. Yes. Nyla looked up at him with those steady brown eyes, Darnell's eyes. Are you going away? The girl asked. Kang crouched down, his knees cracked against the hardwood. Up close, he could see a smear of porridge on Nyla's chin, and a new Korean word written on the back of her hand in Bae's careful handwriting. The word was 용기, courage. I have to go somewhere for a while, he said. But you're going to be safe. You and your mama. Nobody's going to bother you again. Are you coming back? The question was simple, direct. The kind of question only a child asks, because only a child still believes that the answer might be yes. I don't know, Kang said. But I'm going to try. Nyla studied his face. Then she held out Mister. You can borrow him, she said. For when you're scared. He's good at that. Kang looked at the stuffed bunny, washed flat, one eye dangling by a thread, carried across shelters and bus stations and a warehouse floor where guns had been drawn, and a girl had walked through the dark because she believed the man on the other side was worth reaching. He took the bunny. His hands shook, and for the first time in 20 years, in front of a 5-year-old girl, and the woman whose life he had shattered, and the old chef who stood in the kitchen doorway with tears running silently into the creases of his face. Kang Sojin broke. Not the way buildings break, with noise and spectacle and falling debris. The way ice breaks in spring. Quietly. Completely. All at once. The long, slow cracking finally giving way to something open and raw and terribly, terribly human. He pressed Mr. against his chest, and he wept. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in July, Zara Hollis sat on the front steps of a brownstone in Hyde Park and watched her daughter ride a bicycle down the sidewalk. Not a good bicycle, a second-hand one from the thrift store on 53rd Street, purple with a dented fender and a bell that only worked if you hit it twice. But Nyla rode it like it was the fastest machine ever built. Legs pumping, ponytails flying. Mr., the replacement Mr., because the original was on loan, strapped into the front basket with a seatbelt made from a hair ribbon. "Watch me, Mama." "I'm watching, baby." "Both hands." "I see both hands." "No hands." "Put your hands back on the handlebars." Nyla. The brownstone belonged to Bay's niece, who had rented it to Zara, at a price that was either very generous or very subsidized. And Zara suspected she knew which one, but had decided not to argue. Some kindness you accept without examining, because examining it would mean refusing it, and she was done refusing things. She worked days now, pediatric clinic on the south side. Different hours, different patients, same scrubs. She'd gone back to nursing because nursing was the thing she knew how to do. Care for people, read vital signs, stand steady when bodies failed. It was the first job she'd chosen, not run to, and the difference was everything. The charges against Kang So-jin had been filed in March. Federal conspiracy, accessory to involuntary manslaughter, racketeering. The news covered it for a week. The Korean Mafia boss who had turned himself in, dismantled his own organization, and testified against his own lieutenant. The reporters called it unprecedented. The prosecutors called it cooperation. Bae called it yonggi, courage. Yoon Tae-hyuk had been arrested in February, picked up by federal agents at an airport in Detroit, with a bag packed for Seoul and a passport under a name that wasn't his. He was charged with first-degree murder for Darnell Hollis's death, along with 17 additional counts related to the off-book operations. He did not plead guilty. He did not cooperate. He sat in a courtroom with flat eyes and said nothing. And the jury saw exactly what Zara had seen in a parking lot at 2 a.m. A man who smiled like you were already dead. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The verdict? Guilty on all counts. Zara did not attend the sentencing. She was at home that day, helping Nyla practice the Korean words Bae had taught her. The girl had a list taped to the refrigerator, 27 words and counting. Her favorite was cheap, which meant home. She said it every morning when she came downstairs for breakfast, not because anyone asked her to, because she liked the way it sounded. Because she finally had a place that matched the word. Kang's sentencing was in August. Zara hadn't seen him since the night at the restaurant, the night he'd walked into a room full of the most powerful men in his world and told the truth. The night her daughter had handed him a stuffed bunny and told him to be brave. She'd written him 1 letter. She'd started it 11 times. Thrown away 9 drafts. The final version was 3 lines long. I don't forgive you. I'm not sure I ever will. But my daughter sleeps through the night now, and that matters more than my anger. She didn't know if he'd received it. She didn't know if it helped. She didn't know if anything could help a man who had signed the order that killed the father of the child whose bunny he now held in a cell somewhere, waiting for a judge to decide how many years a confession was worth. But she'd written it, because Darnell had always said that holding on to anger was like holding on to a hot pan. The longer you gripped, the deeper the burn. And she was tired of burning. The summer moved the way summers do in Chicago. Slow, sticky, full of sirens and ice cream trucks, and the particular golden light that hits the lake at 7 in the evening and makes the whole city look like it's been dipped in honey. Nyla started summer camp, made friends, came home with paint on her elbows and stories about a boy named Terrence who could burp the entire alphabet, and a girl named Priya who was teaching everyone Korean phrases she'd learned from YouTube. "Mama," Nyla said one evening, sitting on the kitchen floor with a coloring book and a box of crayons that Bae had sent in the mail, "do you think the food man is okay?" Zara was making dinner, rice and chicken, and the pickled radish that Bae had taught her to make before they left the restaurant. She didn't stop chopping. "I think so, baby. Do you think Mr. is taking care of him?" "I think Mr. is doing a very good job." Nyla colored in silence for a moment. Then, "I miss him." Zara's knife went still on the cutting board. "I know you do. Is that okay? To miss someone who made you sad?" Zara set the knife down. She turned around and looked at her daughter. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, brown eyes up, Darnell's eyes, asking a question that most adults couldn't answer honestly. "Yeah," Zara said. "It's okay. You can miss someone and still be angry at them. You can care about someone and still know they did wrong. People are complicated, baby. That's just how it is." "Like Daddy?" "What do you mean?" "Like how I miss Daddy even though he went away." Zara knelt down. She pulled Nyla onto her lap, right there on the kitchen floor, with the rice boiling over on the stove, and the radish half chopped, and the evening light coming through the window like a warm hand. "Daddy didn't go away, baby. Daddy was taken. And it wasn't his fault. And it wasn't your fault. And missing him is the most okay thing in the world." Nyla pressed her face into Zara's chest. "I miss him every day," the girl whispered. "Me too. But not the same as before. Before it hurt here." She pressed her hand to her stomach. "Now it hurts here." She moved her hand to her chest. "That's different, right?" "That's different." "That's better?" "Yeah, baby. That's better." They sat on the kitchen floor while the rice boiled over and the light shifted from gold to amber to the soft, bruised purple of a Chicago evening. And for the first time in 4 years, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full. Full of a man who burned pancakes. Full of a name spoken with love instead of grief. Full of a little girl who had walked past guns and a stuffed bunny on loan. And a Korean word for courage written on the back of a small, brown hand. The sentencing was on a Thursday. Zara didn't go. But she stood in her kitchen that morning, making Nyla's breakfast, and she paused. Set down the spoon. Put both hands on the counter. And said, out loud, to the empty room, "I hope they see who you're trying to become, not just who you were." She didn't know who she was talking to. Kang, Darnell. Herself. Maybe all three. Then she picked up the spoon and finished making breakfast. Nyla came downstairs in her camp t-shirt and the shoes that finally fit and the confidence of a 6-year-old, who had learned, slowly and painfully, and with the help of a stuffed bunny and an old Korean chef, and a man she called the food man, that the world was not only full of people who leave, it was also full of people who stay, and people who come back, and people who break, and people who, in the breaking, finally become something worth putting back together. Mama? Yeah, baby? Can I bring the radish to camp for show and tell? Priya wants to try it. You want to bring pickled radish to show and tell. Bay says food is how you make friends. Zara smiled. Not the ghost of a smile, not the memory of one. A real, full, present tense smile that lived in her face and her chest and her hands and the way she looked at her daughter, standing in the kitchen doorway with Darnell's eyes and a new word for courage written on her skin. Then bring the radish. Nyla grinned, gap-toothed, enormous, a grin that could power a city block, and ran to the refrigerator. And Zara Hollis stood in her kitchen in Hyde Park on a Thursday morning in August and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten its shape. Not hope. She'd found hope months ago, small and fragile and terrifying. This was bigger. This was the thing that comes after hope. The thing that arrives when you've been broken and rebuilt and broken again and still decided to keep standing. Not because you're strong, not because you're brave, not because a man on a staircase promised to fix what couldn't be fixed, but because a little girl with a stuffed bunny taught you that the world is worth walking into, even when there are guns, even when there is blood, even when the man at the center of it all turns out to be both the one who destroyed you and the one who tried to make it right. The word for it wasn't in English. It was in Korean. Bay had taught it to Nyla, who had taught it to Zara, who had written it on a sticky note on the refrigerator next to 27 other words and a drawing of a bunny. Huebulk. Recovery. Not the absence of pain, the presence of something stronger. Subscribe and turn on notifications not to miss our next story. Share your thoughts in the comments and inspire others.